Welcome back everybody to part 2 of our 10-year anniversary Q&A video. As always, thank you all for your engagement and feedback. I've definitely got enough new questions for a part 3, but if you have even more questions, then feel free to leave them in the comment section of this video as well. So, let's get straight back to it. Flint Nuka asks, what is your motivation for starting Courier's Mind? Oh boy. Flint, you may not realize this, but you have just opened a huge can of worms. In order to fully answer this question, I'm just going to give you all a history lesson, so sit tight, this is gonna be a long one. So obviously the original inspiration was Freeman's Mind. I think I started watching around 2008, and I was instantly hooked. I was just amazed by the genius of the concept and its simplicity. This was still a few years before Let's Plays became so dominant, and machinima was still quite popular. And this form of machinima was by far the easiest to make from a technical standpoint, and I would argue that is still the case today. So naturally, I immediately wanted to make my own version, just like how Red vs. Blue spawned a whole generation of Halo machinima. Now, the only game I had at the time that could in theory fit with this format was Doom 3. Now, I haven't even finished the game back then. I had no idea what kind of software I needed to record the footage, and my only microphone was a cheap piece of plastic shit. I certainly didn't know how to turn off the HUD or any kind of manipulation of the game either. But all I wanted to do was just let my imagination go wild, and so I started writing scripts based on scenarios that I knew were part of the game. Those early scripts are still in one of my hard drives somewhere, so it would be a hell of a nostalgia trip if I could find them again. But unfortunately, I never actually made anything from Doom 3 in the end. I was 17 at the time, my studies caught up with me, and I got distracted with other daydreams. Now, fast forward to 2010, and that was when I played my first ever Fallout game, which was Fallout 3. Holy Christ, was I hooked. This was a life-changing experience for me. Not only did I truly develop a taste for RPGs from that moment onwards, but I really started to appreciate video games as genuine art and not just a piece of entertainment. Needless to say, I enjoyed Fallout New Vegas just as much when that came out, which was only about a few months later after I finished Fallout 3. And it was around this time, I want to say Christmas 2010, when I first started wondering how a Mind series in Fallout could potentially work. One of the first things I did was try and see if anyone else has made something like this before, and I couldn't find one. Now, in retrospect, Matt's Mind actually came out in November that year, but for whatever reason, I just didn't find it. I guess the YouTube algorithm was still quite young back then, so that's when I realized that there's a possible gap for me to jump into. I still have very limited knowledge on how you could actually pull this off, but it was there in the back of my mind, and like I said, it was a good subject to daydream about. But that's all it was for about a year. It was nothing more than fantasy. But what really changed everything was my first year at university, which started in October 2010. Even though I was consistently one of the top students in my class before then, I was really just a big fish in a relatively small pond. The leap from college, which is the British equivalent of high school, to the university that I went to was enormous in terms of workload and frankly what's expected of you, because I was suddenly surrounded by people that were at least as good as me. That didn't click in my head for most of that year, and by the time it did, we were one term away from our first year exams. Now, these exams determined whether or not we get to stay in the university. It's not a standard thing across all British universities, but it was a thing in this one. What made the penny drop for me was our first mock exam, which I failed miserably in pretty much all of the subjects I was doing at the time. It was a wrecking ball through my psyche and self-confidence. All of that just shattered in the course of a day. It's been over 10 years and I can still remember how that felt at the time. Now, I want to apologize if this story is triggering any flashbacks for anyone else, by the way, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had this experience. But anyway, for the next 8 weeks or so, I had to drag myself up from the very bottom of the pile. Not only in terms of grades, but also my shattered confidence. My mother actually tells me to this day that she's amazed that I didn't suffer a nervous breakdown and just drop out altogether. I never had to truly work for my grades before this moment. It was always smooth sailing, so this kind of struggle was completely new to me. And in the end, I did manage to improve my grades, but only enough to scrape through by the skin of my teeth. So while it was a relief that I wouldn't have to drop out or stay behind a year, it kind of destroyed me mentally. All of my confidence, my self-esteem, all of that was just gone. I became a shriveled up husk of a person, that's all I can say, and it would take years for me to properly recover from that. So, needless to say that during the summer of 2011, I was not in a good place mentally, and I became more and more convinced that outside of my early school years, I was a failure. And one thing that really started to bug me was how none of the personal projects I tried to do, things like short stories, short films, machinima, and so forth, I never truly finished any of that. And this realization kind of fed my insecurities and just made me feel worse. Something along the lines of, never mind academic achievements, if I couldn't even manage a personal project, something I should have genuine passion for, then what can I possibly achieve? Now, I mentioned earlier that my mother was surprised that I kept it together and scraped through my exams that year. Well, I basically drew on that energy again, that part of me that wanted to fight back. The part of me that said, no, you are capable of achieving something, and you're going to fucking prove it to yourself. And in that moment, I thought, what can I do? Which one of my dozens of random ideas can I conceivably take out of my daydreams and make it into reality? Well, that idea turned out to be Courier's Mind. And so, over that summer, I made Season 1. Well, did it work? In a way, it did. It confirmed to me that if I really put my mind into something, no pun intended, then I can make something out of it. No matter how simple it was, I still set myself a goal and I achieved it. It also helped a lot that after I started my second year, I was able to drag my grades up by 2 levels. And all the while, I kept Courier's Mind going. Because as far as I'm concerned, I made a vow to myself that I would see this project all the way through to the end. No matter how long it took, no matter how few people even cared, I had to make it to the end for my own sake. That was true 10 years ago, and that is still true today. Now, unfortunately, my self-confidence didn't truly return until I started my second master's degree back in 2016. But you don't build a skyscraper without solid foundations. And as far as I'm concerned, for my self-confidence, Courier's Mind is that foundation. And that is why I started this series and why 10 years later, I'm still determined to finish it. Whew, that was something. I sure hope that answered your question, Flint Nuka. Yellow 13 Firestorm asks, why Fallout New Vegas? Okay, so after that very long answer, I think you get the idea, but I'll elaborate a little bit. The reason why I went with Fallout New Vegas and not Fallout 3 was twofold. Firstly, I didn't want to do the opening intro where you are a small child. I couldn't figure out how that would work, and I couldn't do a fake child voice. I don't think the world is ready to hear something that terrible. Secondly, the way that Fallout 3 is structured is fundamentally different to Fallout New Vegas. Maybe a true nerd made a really good analysis of how Bethesda placed various quests and locations to encourage the player to just wander around, which is great for exploration, but not so good if you're trying to make a linear mind series. By contrast, Fallout New Vegas is, to borrow his phrase, a curated experience. All you really need to do is follow the general direction of the main quests, and along the way, you will encounter most of the side quests without going on a massive detour. So that made the planning for Courier's Mind far easier, at least for the way I do things. And really, the final reason why I chose Fallout New Vegas was because I loved that game, and it was the one I just finished playing at the time, so everything was fresh in my head. I knew it would be difficult and very long, But if I just picked a simple linear game, then maybe it would have been buried under so many other Mind series out there. Rather fittingly, I took a gamble and it paid off. Papa G asks, how far ahead do you plan or write this? As in, from Season 1, did you know where you would be in Season 10, or do you play it season by season? So going back to what I said earlier about how Fallout New Vegas is structured, it's actually more linear than you might think, which means I was able to plan quite far ahead when I first started Season 1. Now, things have obviously shifted from season to season, but as far as the general order of events go, I think from the get-go I was able to plan all the way to something like Season 7, which was when he eventually got to the Strip. I planned out the rest of the series after I graduated, and I think it was around 2015 when I realized exactly how many seasons it was likely going to take. I don't remember if I already said this elsewhere, but I'm keeping that number a secret for now. All I can say is we are getting very close. But you know, none of this was set in stone. The kind of things that get shifted around are things like what quest stage I should end a season on to make it nice and tight. Sometimes episodes get shifted slightly, mainly because I forgot how long a certain quest is, or how much dialogue there is. So, for exactly where an episode starts and ends, that kind of planning happens roughly from season to season. Papa G also asks, how is it possible that the first 3.5 seasons take place in a day? Oh, easy, I fucked up. Basically, the in-game timescale is roughly 1 to 30, so every real-world second is 30 seconds in the game. I used a mod to change the ratio to 1 to 1 because I thought that was more realistic, but what I didn't realize until much later was that the in-game time pauses when you're in a conversation. Also, fast traveling doesn't skip the correct amount of time if you alter the scale like that. So even though I set the time to something realistic, it ended up stretching time out far longer than it should have. I didn't want to have him just stop somewhere for no good reason, so I pushed onwards until we got to Novak, and from that point onwards I would deliberately skip forward some time whenever I fast travel, and sometimes between episodes to compensate for all of this. No Name asks, did you use JIP companions command and control mod to control your companions, or did you use commands? I don't use any mods or commands to control my companions. I use unlimited companions to have as many companions as I want, and if I want them to wait, I literally just walk up to them, open the companion wheel, and tell them to wait. I edit that bit out so it looks relatively seamless. To be honest, the chaos of the AI can be a great source of comedy sometimes, so I just let them do their thing. No Name asks, are you planning on using quest mods like some guys' mods? I don't have any plans to use quest mods for 3 reasons. Firstly, there's more than enough content in this game already, guys. I mean, holy shit. Secondly, adding more quests would definitely mess up the pacing of the story. I have a reasonably solid plan on how the seasons will play out, so I really don't want to change that at this late stage. And thirdly, I don't like the idea of showing things that are non-canon. I mean, okay, Bethesda can and have already done things that can be considered as retcons, but I do want to make this series as future-proof as possible. So let's take The Frontier for example. If I was to somehow include that, then what happens if one day Bethesda makes a reference in, let's say, Fallout 76 that whoops, Alaska is now a volcanic hellscape where nothing can possibly survive? That would be a bummer, wouldn't it? I know this is all just pointless speculation on my part, but for the time being, I have no desire to expand this show beyond the vanilla game and the DLCs. Hey, present day Face here. Can you tell that I wrote this way back before everybody actually played through The Frontier and the subsequent dumpster fire that turned out to be? Oh, such innocence. Lost Lugia asks, would you be able to tell us what little backstory is currently known about our favorite psychopathic, amnesia-ridden courier so we can sort of refresh ourselves? I don't actually remember what I've written for that. I think it's clear that he's well-traveled. He's definitely made multiple references to NCR territories like Vault City and Reno and so forth. Nothing too outside the box right now, but beyond that, spoilers. Dying Battery 22 asks, why don't you use God mode or infinite AP points? Mainly because I haven't really needed to, if I'm honest. Other than death claws and that bit in Caesar's tent, I haven't really come across a situation where the courier would die all that much. Keep in mind that most of the time he has a lot of companions with him, like more than what the game was balanced for. So either way, I don't really need God mode. Besides, I like the idea of genuinely fighting for my life when I'm in a fight against boss characters like Death Claws. I think it makes the situation feel more authentic. As for infinite AP, I don't really want the Courier to just use VATS forever. It's kind of annoying having to do the slow motion speak all the time, to be honest. And again, I just haven't found it that necessary. Wow629 asks, are unique weapons going to be featured in more ways? Well, if I can find them, then sure. So, one of my early ideas was to have him discover some of the GRA weapons in places that make sense instead of just making him buy them. That's why he found the unique recharger pistol in Season 3. But I kind of forgot about that idea afterwards, and by the time I remembered, I've already gone past most of the areas where I originally wanted to spawn those weapons. But as for other unique weapons in the vanilla game, my general approach is that I will only get them if I can find them organically. I don't want to make him go out of his way to get something if he has no other reason to go there, because first of all, how would he know ahead of time that there's something worth looting there? And secondly, he's already busy enough. Would it be worth his time to go to places like that? I mean, he could summon the crystal ball, but that shit takes a lot of magicka, and to get more magicka, I would have to reinstall Skyrim and what the fuck was I talking about again? Konstantin Kamenko asks, is there a game or two you would suggest to your viewers? Ooh, I have a lot of games I like, but let's keep this short and interesting. I'm going to recommend some that are a little bit more obscure. Firstly, if you're into relaxing games that can help you unwind after a stressful day, then look no further than Islanders. This is the most chill-out game I've ever played. It's a simple puzzle/city building game that doesn't have a steep learning curve, and the music is mesmerizing. To me, this is the video game equivalence of getting a massage. If, on the other hand, you are an obsessive-compulsive person who needs their fix in digital form, then give Visceral Cleanup Detail a try. I haven't played this game in a while, but there's something satisfying about restoring a mostly destroyed environment back to its former glory, one meat chunk at a time. If you're into old-school Doom-type shooters, then Project Warlock might be up your alley. This is actually on my list of candidates for Hero Killer, so I haven't played too much of it yet. I want to maintain surprise, but I've enjoyed my experience so far. And finally, if you're looking for an RPG to fill the void that Cyberpunk 2077 left, I strongly recommend Vampire the Masquerade's Bloodlines. This is probably the most well-known game on my list, but if these graphics is putting you off, just know that some of the people who made the original Fallout also made this, so do I need to say anything else? And of course, I wrote that answer half a year ago, and since then, we've learned that the sequel to Vampire the Masquerade is in development hell. Isn't that just lovely? Michael Miller asks, how have you been holding up since this whole pandemic started? Honestly, I'm doing pretty well. I am a professional software QA engineer, which is basically advanced software testing. So I've been working from home since March 2020, and I don't think it's a big shock to anyone that my hobbies are mostly housebound anyway. So really, my life hasn't changed that much. My shopping schedules have changed, and I haven't been able to meet up with friends, but we mostly chat on Discord every week anyway, so yeah. My family is also doing pretty well. My mother is in the UK and she's retired now, so she's fairly safe. My dad and stepmother lives in China, but they were able to shelter in place pretty well early last year, so all things considered, we are all doing fine. My mother and myself have both been fully vaccinated now, so yeah, we can't really complain. Of course, I am perfectly aware that a lot of people out there had their lives severely disrupted by this horrific pandemic. Please stay safe, everybody. Alan Lang asks, what does 101 Face actually mean, and where did the name originate from? Oh god, well there is a story behind it and it's really stupid. So, when I was in college / high school for you Americans, I was a huge science nerd, and in one of my physics lessons, I came across a concept called phasers. I honestly cannot remember what it was about and why this concept blew my mind back then. We're talking more than 12 years ago. And I did not do that kind of physics after college. And while writing this answer, I actually tried to look into phasers again, and from what I can tell, this is a kind of mathematical concept that's frequently used to graphically represent electrical signals. I'm pretty sure I just grossly oversimplified the concept, so if you are a physicist and you think I'm being a fucking idiot, please feel free to keep those opinions to yourselves. But anyway, I guess the way my teacher explained it to me gave me the wrong impression that this is somehow a key that can help unlock the secrets of the universe, like a spinning string theory or something. Because I started using the word phaser whenever I play a video game that asks for a save file name. And around this time, a bunch of my friends got really invested into Super Smash Bros., both Melee and Brawl. And so naturally, I wanted to name myself Phaser. But that word is one character too long to fit, so on the spot, I decided to call myself Phase instead. And so that became my go-to username online. Unfortunately, Phase is a pretty unoriginal name, and so predictably when it came to making a YouTube account, Phase was already taken. So again, on the spot, I decided on 101 Phase. For no reason other than it sounded cool. I've heard of this concept called Room 101, and I was under the impression that it's quite ominous, so being an edgy teenager at the time, I thought that sounded nice and fitting. I had no idea at the time that it was a concept introduced in the novel 1984, and in case you didn't know, it was a room specifically designed to torture people both physically and psychologically. But having realized that a couple of years later, I can totally imagine having a debate with the Courier would be like being locked inside Room 101. In other words, a lot of screaming and a lot of dead brain cells. Alan Lane then asks, do you plan to do any Mind series after Courier's Mind? Oh dear god, look, I cannot possibly commit to anything else at this moment in time. Courier's Mind has been going on for 10 years, and is probably gonna last a few more years after that. Who the hell knows what my life is gonna be like after that? By then, Starfield and Outer Worlds 2 would be old news, and Elder Scrolls 6 would probably be released. Hell, maybe even Fallout 5 would be out. Or at least it would be announced by then. All I can say is that making Courier's Mind is a lot of effort, so it's questionable if I would even make anything after it's done. But if I have to answer that question right now, I guess I would like to take my next project to something outside the Fallout universe. Maybe a space opera? So naturally, I am going to keep a close eye on Starfield. Jack Mosley asks, opinions on Doom Eternal? Well, I haven't played it, I'm afraid. I do own the 2016 game, and I haven't played that either. But from what I've heard, they're both great games, and since I'm not a game journalist, I'm sure I'll have a great time with them. John Von Baslik asks, what is the Courier's favorite toy? I'm not entirely sure what you meant by toy. I guess it would be Benny's gun, considering that it's literally the Courier's own murder weapon. Oh, and I guess the demon gun should count, simply because they would haunt him if he doesn't mention them. And that's it for part 2. Like I said before, there will be a part 3 next Monday, so you have a chance to post more questions if you want. Something else I want to point out is that I've recorded a lot of these questions months ago, and since then, a few people have changed their YouTube names, so if the screenshots don't match what I'm saying, that's why. Also, looking back on this, I've noticed that some people have added more questions by editing their original comments. If you have more questions you want to ask, please do that by adding another comment, because I don't get notified when you make changes like that. I have seen at least one instance of this so far, so I will answer those additional questions in the next part. But other than that, I'll see you all in part 3.